One of my favorite movies of all time is Pretty Woman with Julia Roberts and Richard Gere. See some of you shaking your heads. You love it too. It's okay to admit it. And you know this story. For those of you who maybe, have moved here from another planet and haven't seen it yet, it's the story of a prostitute who happens to get into the car of a wealthy businessman and work out a pretty sweet deal for 1 week of companionship. They fall in love. They live happily ever after. He rescues her from the balcony. It's phenomenal. Rent it tonight. It's Friday. And what I believe is probably the most poignant scene in that whole film, Vivian and Edward are lying in bed, looking into one another's eyes deeply and having a very real conversation. Vivian starts to tell him what led to her life of prostitution, and she talks about all of the messages that she had received throughout her childhood and her youth. She talks about how she made that first trick and she was in it and she didn't see a way out. Edward, being the great guy that he is, because he just made a deal with the prostitute a few days earlier, but he's a great guy, he starts to tell her how beautiful she is and how smart she is and how capable she is. And Vivian looks at him and she simply says, "The bad stuff is easier to believe." The bad stuff is easier to believe. For too many of our foster children and youth, and even for the families that we work with, the negative messages that they've received their entire lives are ringing loudly in their ears because they're easier to believe. They're easier to believe.